Hey everybody, Nick Espinoza, your chief security fanatic here. Don't forget to subscribe. And today, we once again have to talk about AI because, quite frankly, we probably talk about it way too much, but it's super, super important. And as we know, AI use is on the rise, but the developers, those actually using AI to build things, are trusting it less. This is an interesting dichotomy, and quite frankly, it's one that really deserves attention. Samuel Axon of Ars had a really good write-up on this, and what we're talking about here is a recent survey of 49,000 professional developers by basically that are all using Stack Overflow. Stack Overflow is that essential information hub for developers, and they did this survey, and it's really putting the current state of AI as a dev tool or development tool into context here. So let's go through the nuts and bolts, because the survey found that 4 in 5 developers use AI tools in their workflow in 2025. That portion obviously has been exploding in the recent years in the wake of basically ChatGPT coming onto the scene, right? That said, and I quote, "Trust in the accuracy of AI has fallen from 40% in previous years to just 29% this year," end quote. In other words, we're trusting it less, specifically the developers, again, those that are creating the software, operating systems, whatever, that are running our lives. Now, this disparity between these two metrics really illustrates the evolving and complex impact of AI tools like GitHub's Copilot or Cursor essentially on the development community. There's relatively little debate among developers that the tools they should be useful, right? But here's the thing, people are still figuring out what the limitations are and the best applications of these AI tools are. And so when asked what their top frustration with AI tools were, 45% of respondents said they struggled with, quote, AI solutions that are almost right, but not quite, end quote. That is the single largest reported problem. I've actually seen this myself. When I've asked like a ChatGPT to write me like a script for something, depending on an operating system, let's say it's a script for Linux, et cetera, and when I'm reviewing it, I'm like, yeah, this is in the ballpark, but this would never properly run. That's because, unlike outputs that are clearly wrong, these start to introduce bugs and gremlins or other problems that are difficult to immediately identify and then relatively time consuming to actually troubleshoot, right? Especially for people like junior developers who approach this work with a false sense of confidence thanks to artificial intelligence. In other words, the AI is getting you 95% of the way, but that 5% you need to chase down, which is a time waster, it's problematic, it's all of these things. So as a result, more than a third of developers in the survey, quote, report that some of their visits to Stack Overflow are a result of AI-related issues, end quote. In other words, they're going to the community and trying to figure out what on earth is wrong in the coding, and here we are. It's basically dragging the development community down. So, in other words, if I'm framing this differently, code suggestions they accepted from a large language model-based tool just introduced problems that basically they had to go to other people to solve. So, even as major improvements have recently come via reasoning optimized models, that close but not quite, reliability is unlikely to really vanish completely anytime soon. It's basically endemic to the very nature of how predictive technology works. And so that's why 72% of the survey participants said that quote unquote vibe coding is not part of their professional work. Some feel it's too unreliable and it can introduce hard to debug issues that are not appropriate for production, and on and on and on. Now, here's the thing. I think if it erodes the confidence of developers right now, this actually leads to a bigger problem that we have in the big tech industry. And I've actually heard this of cybersecurity vendors as well that are creating things like operating systems for firewalls, where they are now requiring that about 30% of their code that their developers are generating have to be AI based. In other words, they are requiring their developers to use artificial intelligence. At the moment, that could be a time suck, or it could introduce problems into, let's say, a live production version of a firewall that is routing traffic for a business, and then a glitch kicks in when you configure something that it hadn't anticipated, and then boom, here we go. So even vetting these things through the development process potentially has bugs that nobody's going to catch, especially when the large language model may be scanning the code saying, yep, all good, no issues. This is a big issue. This could mean potentially we are going to have some defectiveness in the software and by virtue of that, the hardware that the software potentially runs. So we'll see where this goes. I think obviously artificial intelligence is going to continue to get better. I know a lot of developers, when I talk to them, say, well, if I'm using AI, I'm basically training my replacement, but it's coming. And this is something that we're going to have to recognize and realize, because while we may have gremlins in the system right now, we might be in the ballpark, but not exactly perfect on the coding. It's going to get there eventually, or it's going to get really damn close. And so by virtue of that, we're going to have an issue when we start to have another vertical start to lose their jobs. So here we are. We'll see what happens. But if you're coding with AI, you probably have bugs, whether you realize it or not. And please like, share, follow me here on Facebook and Twitter at NickAESP. And please feel free to subscribe to me at YouTube as well. And as always, stay safe, stay online, and please attempt to stay private, secure, and online. Take care.